So Dr. Van Sluytman, we're just absolutely delighted to have you. Thank you for being with us for our Monday morning inspiration. And the theme today will be, we will not live our lives from pillar to post. And the quote is, I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight, my other hand. And that's Lucille Clifton. Dr. Van Sluytman is the Assistant Dean and Associate Professor at Morgan State University, and his research focuses on disparities among members of marginalized communities. For the last 2 years, if not longer, we have shunted from what appears to be one challenge to the next, unrest related to equity, disease, contamination, isolation, and war. Hurriedly, we trod on through the drums of change and upheaval, hardly being given a chance to catch our breath, slake the bruises of the onslaught, nor the callouses of the march. Today, we will stop. In his message, Dr. Van Sluytman asks us to stand still, feel our breath, hear our breath, look at the sky, sit and listen. On this day, we will see ourselves. We will be embraced in the arms of all others, those who marched next to us, before us, and who are still to march. We will rejoice in our ancestors' past and build provisions for those to come. Today, we will embrace humanity. Dr. Van Sluytman, we turn it over to you for your inspirational message. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. I am going to share my screen. Listening to you read that, Diane, I'm just really kind of like, I'm a little proud of myself. I'm like, wow, who wrote that? I spent my my weekend with one of my favorite next generation people, my nephew. And he was like, oh, wait a minute, Uncle Lorenz, are you really going to give an inspiration? Dude, you are so not inspiration. You're all about the truth. So I'm hoping that I could offer a little bit of inspiration this morning to all of you who have made it here this morning, this beautiful Monday morning. It is absolutely gorgeous outside. The sun is shining very brightly. I think that I wanted you to spend some time thinking about standing still, sitting still. I know that all of you are deeply engaged in this presentation. No reading extra emails, no sending, everyone looks up, no, I mean, God, I've been there. So I absolutely know that we're trotting on, and we're oftentimes forced to trot on in these spaces as soon as we sit down at 8:30 or 9 o'clock, whatever time it is. I do want to talk to you a little bit. I'm going to share my screen. I do want to talk to you a little bit about something that's very, very important to me right now, especially as a provider and someone who works in social services and provision of social services. So let me share this with you. Sorry, I'm not sharing that. I just wanted to, I want you to consider some elements of what our lives are as people who are providing services. And I'm not particularly concerned with whether or not you are right there on the front line, holding someone's hands or walking them through the steps, or if you're the person writing the grants in order to make sure that we have the resources in order to provide those services. I just want you to understand that you are part of this environment. And I want you to take care of yourself, and I want you to be aware. And an important part of you taking care of yourself is being aware of what's going on in the environment around you. So I wanted to talk today a little bit about secondary trauma, and that is the emotional duress that results when an individual hears about the firsthand trauma experience of another. The essential act of listening to trauma stories may take an emotional toll that compromises professional functioning, diminishing quality of life. So it's one of the reasons why we end up putting so much into our weekends, and that's why we have Mondays, right? Monday mornings. We put so much into our weekends in order to recover that sometimes we oftentimes end up exhausting ourselves, and so Monday becomes another just day. So I want you to think about if you're experiencing any symptoms of exposure to secondary trauma, difficulty talking about your feelings, anxiety, irritation, overeating, undereating, not taking care of yourself, difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, losing sleep over clients, worried that they are not doing enough for your clients, dreaming about your clients' trauma experiences. Diminished joy, feeling trapped by work, diminished feelings of satisfaction, dealing with intrusive thoughts about clients' feelings of hopelessness, blaming others. I just want you to sit with some of that in order to think about, this is not only the work that we're seeing with clients, but also the things that we're seeing in the world right now, right? We saw some atrocities are being broadcast this morning from the Ukraine. But, last week, Sunday, I think many of you, myself not included, sat down to watch an awards ceremony that's about celebrating people. And we ended up seeing something that was fairly traumatic on live television, someone slapping someone, an act of violence. And sometimes we kind of just skim over those things and think that they don't really have an impact on us, but sometimes they do, and sometimes they have an impact on our clients. So oftentimes we interpret this and we embody this in our work with clients as well as with our coworkers, seeking not to collaborate, withdrawing, changing relationships, lots of conflicts and blaming others, conflictual engagements, poor relationships, poor communications, impatience, avoidance of work with clients. And sometimes we interpret that as like, oh, that person has an attitude, as opposed to that person might be experiencing some stress that they really need to sit with, that maybe I need to sit with, that maybe we need to talk about. So our personal values may be impacted in these situations, questioning our frame of references. I know that many of us are working with marginalized communities, whether or not that be people of color or LGBT members of the community, people with different disabilities or abilities. And sometimes we have a very difficult time seeing ourselves when we are working with these communities and how we can contribute and how we can be parts of these communities and provide sustained engagement for them. Our worldview tends to shift, disruptions of our capacity of self. Am I actually able to providing services? Am I actually making a difference? And so your needs and your beliefs and your beliefs in relationships, your trusting, esteem, control, and intimacy could also be impacted by these things. And I'm going very, very fast, people, but I do want you to understand that this is material that you can come back to and take a look at. Sometimes we say, go to a therapist, and we have absolutely no idea why we're there. Sometimes we're there because we're experiencing these traumas and we're not necessarily paying attention to them.
Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed.
I wanted to read that poem, but I felt like if I should probably go specifically back to Miss Clifton, who is a Baltimorean, and let you hear her voice as she told the story. Sometimes we're hearing the story. The only thing that we might have heard is, something has tried to kill me, and that's sometimes what we're hearing from our clients. But we didn't hear the part that says, and has failed, meaning that we are survivors. We are all surviving our traumas. But we have to understand that failure may not be an option. Failure is not an option. And sometimes we do have to make it up between starshine and clay. So what to do? I want you to be curious about what has happened instead of what's wrong with you. Resist re-traumatization by minimizing stressors. I know that for me, that means that I am not looking at Instagram, and although I finally figured out what TikTok was, I am not looking at TikTok either. Um, I'm trying to stay away from Facebook because sometimes you get these intrusive images that you are just not prepared to see. Try validating experiences through empathic listening. Risk personal discomfort. Take responsibility for your own education. Examine your understanding of how your race, class, gender, sexual orientation, religion shapes your worldview. Acknowledge and call out the pain. I think that sometimes we sit with the pain and we say, we're being strong, be strong, be strong. You know, I heard earlier, someone is like preparing for a baby shower and just kind of like pushing oneself through it. Yes, you want to celebrate. Yes, you want to be a part of this, but you're working really, really hard. And that sit down is your body telling you to sit down. Give yourself a moment of peace. What to do, give yourself a moment of peace. What not to do. Don't assume that everyone is impacted in the same way and needs the same type of support. Don't remain silent in the face of injustice. Don't be defensive. Someone's asking you, what's wrong? Tell them what's wrong. If you're being defensive, we're not really able to move past this position. I want you to try to relax. I want you to try to refresh, and I want you to try to recharge, because you are all we have.
Thank you, Dr. Van Sluytman.
Thank you.
Wow, thank you for the message, for sharing what are the signs and what can we do. And you're right, we are exposed to so much in our work and also in our lives, and especially what's happening with Ukraine and all the images. So, you know, this message couldn't come at a more timely place than now. So we open it up for thoughts, comments, and questions for Dr. Van Sluytman.
I do have a question. I got a thought and a question. When we talk about some of the residual trauma or secondary trauma, right? When we look earlier on at the pandemic, I'm talking March, April, May of 2020, we would see a lot of traumatizing things on the news, and then in our community, and then in our neighborhood, and then in our house, maybe, right? And there is a level of intensity and a level of frequency. Now, as we are moving, you know, away from this spike, away from the pandemic, are you still seeing a lot of secondary trauma? How has that morphed recently in the past several months?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that we have to remember that there's no one thing that would be classified as something that might traumatize someone, right? And so the idea is that I am not necessarily directly exposed to this, this trauma. However, I am hearing of it. And so we might be hearing from people that they have been harmed in some way. That's not related to the Ukraine, that's not related to police violence, that's not related to some sort of bias attack, right? But rather something that happened in their family 30 years ago, 100 years ago. And we are listening to them and we are taking this in without necessarily acknowledging that this hurts us too. We feel pain. So I feel like, you know, there are these flashpoints in time where it's like, okay, everyone is really paying attention to this and everyone is really kind of concerned about this. But, you know, what about, I know that I did some volunteer work a couple of years ago, tutoring refugees in Northeast Baltimore. And there were, you know, folks who were sitting at the table who were learning how to write in English and telling stories to each other, but sharing their food at the same time. And they were Syrians, and they were people from Sudan, and there were people from like Chad. Democratic Republic of Congo, and they're telling these stories, and it's not on the news, right? We're not really hearing about these stories immediately, but when they walk through our doors and they're sitting there talking to us, we are hearing the stories, and we are potentially at risk of being traumatized at that point, right? I spent time, again, with some of my favorite young people this weekend. Despite my slow driving, they participated in allowing me to pay for dinner and lunch and breakfast and transportation. Funny how they do that. And at one point, my nephew started to talk to me about his great grandmother. And I didn't realize how traumatic that story was for me. And he is sitting there watching me be somewhat traumatized by this and not really knowing why I am so disturbed by this story. I mean, literally, I was driving down 83, almost on the verge of tears about this story. And he's sitting there watching this, somewhat powerful man in his life be overcome. We had to talk about that. Because he didn't know her. He wasn't born when she passed. He didn't know the story. And so in revealing that story and talking to him about the story, it became very important for me to address my trauma, but also to protect him from the trauma and let him know that his feelings were valid. So they manifest in multiple ways.
Yeah.
And I paid for dinner again. Which is dangerous when you're having dinner with a foodie who wants to eat lots of food.
Other comments, questions, thoughts?
Diane, I think my presentation was just so comprehensive that all questions were answered.
Or people are really, I think, reflecting.
Yeah, and I'm hearing there's a part that I'm hearing, especially with the story about your nephew, that speaks to recognizing and acknowledging your own triggers, right? If something is happens that triggers you, like lifting that up, the validity of that, the power and impact of that, and that really came across to me, and I think to everybody listening, as you shared this morning, and I thank you so much.
Thank you. The really interesting thing about the story is that he only had a piece of the story. And in order to tell him in order for him to situate himself and understand the story, I had to tell him the entire story, which means that I had to relive the entire story. And so it was like, okay, all right, this is really, really difficult. And I'm not even 100% sure that I knew the entire story.
Wow.
But, I pieced it together and just kind of realized, and luckily, this is a kid that I've enjoyed raising with his parents, who I have a very close relationship with. So I did not necessarily have any challenges with sharing my feelings with him, which is something that many of us have a problem with, right? Sharing our feelings. Do we trust the people in our lives to share our feelings with? And then every once in a while, I think it was really important for us to step out of that boundary and say, I don't really care if I don't trust you. I'm telling you how I feel, right? And it's important for me to tell you how I feel, not so that you can apologize or say you're sorry, but so that I know that I am visible, that I am heard. So what I feel is real for me may not be true for you. I once had a therapist who I fired after he said this, but now I look back and I think of him as being really brilliant when he said, feelings are not facts. Well, I fired him after that, but but he was actually right. Feelings are not facts, but they're true for me.
That's true. That's an important statement. everybody's feelings are valid to them and they're true to them. And we have to, I think that's one thing we forget sometimes, that when people are sharing how they feel, we want to quickly be like, well, you shouldn't feel that way, or, you know, tell people how they should feel, instead of that, just accepting that their feelings are valid to them. And if they feel that way, then that's their truth.
Absolutely. And I would do the inverse of that, right? So someone might not be validating our feelings. Does not mean that our feelings are not true for us.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
You have to come up with strategies to address those feelings. It's hard to talk about feelings on Monday morning, right? When you've kind of like got to get back into the grind, put aside all those things. But why should we put it aside? We've been living in this alternate universe for the last 2 years. You know, let's try something new today.
Dr. Van Sluytman, what I appreciate in your story, sharing with about your nephew, and something that was difficult about your grandmother, is the courage to do that, so that you can demonstrate it's okay to be emotional and cry, but it's okay to share those stories. It's okay to reach, even if it's difficult and hard, so that you also mentor him and others around that it's okay. It's okay to share difficult things and to reach into what is hard. So thank you for that reminder that sometimes we have to have the courage and be bold, even when things are difficult and emotional and devastating, so that we show others it's okay.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And the fear of being overwhelmed by feelings may not be true, right? I might be afraid of that. However, it's not necessarily going to happen. You know, we were able to move past it and through it. We were able to move through it as opposed to past it.
Yeah. And I think it's in sharing those stories that we do heal.
Absolutely.
And when we keep it bottled, and I know from this event we had with our Vietnam veterans, the MC did not want to, he was really reluctant to share a story about, you know, one of his closest friends who was flying a helicopter, and as he was landing, went on a mine and died. And he was carrying the body bag, and he's like, I just don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can do it. I don't want to break down and cry. And I asked the colonel, so if you did cry, and he had the courage to do it. And I think it really showed a lot of the other Vietnam veterans that have been carrying these stories and worried about, you know, if they open up, right? If they open up these memories, what will happen? And I think it was incredibly powerful for these Vietnam veterans to see him share the story and to cry in front of a whole lot of people. So it just kind of reminds me of just how important that is.
And I just think about the fact that my nephew and I had this conversation this weekend spoke so much to intergenerational trauma. Because this is a situation that happened over 150 years ago. Right? And the lives of these women have been changed, grandmother and great grandmother, and my father. And so, you know, we finally resolved later on in the evening of like, wow, this hurt really lives for a very, very long time, and no one really talks about it or thinks about it. It's kind of whispered. And there are many, many communities who are living with generational trauma. Right? And they're expected to be good, assimilated citizens, and they're not supposed to think about their histories of trauma, their histories of seeking asylum and refugee status, the histories of enslavement, their histories of internments, multiple histories, and how it impacts current generations and creates spaces for those generations to actually explore that pain safely. And I think that we do that as providers. We are sitting there and we're not sure where the pain is coming from. and we're soaking it up. So I really ask that you provide yourself with an opportunity to say, wait a minute, some of these feelings are true. Some of them walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, but it's not my duck. Right? So I don't want you to be apathetic and cold, but I think that it's important for us to have a certain amount of insight in order to know what is our stuff.
I had a social worker I worked with once tell me I was freaking out about some family thing, one of my patients' families, and they just asked, like, whose stress is this? And that was a real nice trigger for me to ask myself, like, wait, have I, like, is this mine or is that theirs? But as the years have gone, it's helped me realize, like, okay, that part's not there, but oh God, there is something here that is mine. And what is this bringing up that I'm feeling so intense from their statement? So I really tried to explore for me, and that's been really helpful of, is this mine? If it's a straight up no, I can feel that. And then sometimes it's about, this isn't, but I'm having all of this stuff come up over here. What do I need to process? So I'm not working my stuff out on them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it may not be your stuff, but it certainly makes you powerless. It makes you feel powerless or trapped with the client, or, just not able to make any moves. Right. So I think that we definitely need to know our stuff, and we need to spend some time thinking about our stuff, and we need to create spaces to heal our stuff.
Any other thank you, Michael. Any other final thoughts, comments? One last question. Well, Dr. Van Sluytman, we are so grateful for you this morning and your message about awareness and the impact of the work we have in our lives, and how to take care of ourselves and how to recognize that. So thank you so much for this time and your wisdom. We are just so grateful to you.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Make it up, people, between starshine and clay.
Oh. Everybody have a great rest of your day and week, and thank you for being with us.
Everyone, bye-bye.